Got up and had a hamburger or a biscuit and honey this morning for breakfast. The presence of those foods in your mouth and in your stomach stimulates the pancreas to release a hormone called insulin. The insulin is then secreted into the blood and goes to the liver and circulates all throughout the blood. Because as you break down that biscuit with the honey on it into its basic form of glucose, the blood glucose levels are going to rise. The insulin then acts on specific receptors in the periphery, on cells and in the liver, to take up that glucose so the cells can use it. In the liver, it will induce the liver to produce a large molecular weight glucose called glycogen. And once the blood glucose level comes back to normal, it feeds back. There is a feedback that shuts down the pancreas and prevents the additional secretion of insulin. If the insulin were continued to be released, your blood sugar would go down, 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 and you would become hyperglycemic. So it's very precisely controlled. This is a good example of a negative feedback mechanism. Now, positive feedback mechanisms, as I mentioned, there are not too many. One is shown here. A newborn child is suckling on its mother's breast. That sends nerve impulses to her hypothalamus, which causes her to release oxytocin. Oxytocin acts on the pregnant breast to bring about contraction of the lactiferous cells. It also releases a hormone from the anterior pituitary called prolactin. And prolactin leads to the synthesis, increased production of milk by the mother's breast. The other place where this occurs is in delivery. When a pregnant woman begins to have uterine contractions, the feedback to her hypothalamus leads to the release of oxytocin. Oxytocin acts on the uterus to increase the contractions, and as a result, that will speed up the delivery process. And there is now a synthetic oxytocin that they use called syntocin that they will give to a mother to speed up uterine contractions. So those are positive feedback. You are increasing the amount of release of a hormone by a particular stimulus. Okay, now let's look at the different endocrine glands. There are some, as I mentioned, an endocrine gland is one that is a ductless gland. It releases its substance or chemical called a hormone directly into the bloodstream. And as I mentioned before, the response time for a hormone is relatively slow when we compare it to the nervous system, but its actions are relatively prolonged, certainly much longer than what the nervous system is. There are three types of glands. Pure endocrine glands are thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal cortex, thymus, and pineal. Those glands, the thyroid and adrenal gland are and pineal gland are under the control of the anterior pituitary. The parathyroid gland regulates calcium levels. It is not regulated by the anterior pituitary. It's regulated by calcium levels in the blood. And then the thymus is instrumental in producing T lymphocytes early on in your life. Now, there are combined endocrine exocrine glands. The pancreas. The pancreas produces exocrine substances. What are the exocrine substances produced by the pancreas?
Digestive enzymes.
What? No, exocrine. Those are endocrine.
Digestive enzymes.
Lipase, amylase, yeah, the digestive enzymes are exocrine products of the pancreas. The endocrine products are insulin, glucagon, somatostatin. The ovaries and testes. The ovaries, their endocrine secretion is estrogen and progesterone. What would the exocrine secretion of the ovaries be?
The ova.
The ova. And the testes, their endocrine hormone is testosterone and inhibin, and its exocrine secretion would be sperm. And then we have neuroendocrine glands. the adrenal medulla and the hypothalamus. Neural stimuli, action potentials act on those organs, those structures, to bring about the release from the adrenal medulla of epinephrine and norepinephrine. And in the hypothalamus, stimulates the release of oxytocin and ADH to be stored in the posterior pituitary. Now, hormones vary in structure and vary in synthesis. Many of them are referred to as ring structures. They are formed from cholesterol. Remember, cholesterol is that horrible chemical circulating in our bodies, and you got to reduce it. Well, if we eliminated all the cholesterol in our body, we would be dead, because it's necessary for the synthesis of cell membranes, the maintenance of cell membranes, as well as the synthesis of all these steroids, steroidal molecules, cortisone, corticosterone, testosterone, estrogen, aldosterone. There are a number of steroidal type hormones that are formed from cholesterol. There are others that are formed from amino acids, and they can be as few as 3 amino acids. For example, that TRH, that's thyrotropin releasing hormone, that's only 3 amino acids long. Some of them can be upwards of 160, 180 amino acids, and those are called proteins. But ACTH is adrenocorticotropic hormone, TRH is thyrotropin releasing hormone, FSH is follicle stimulating hormone, LH is luteinizing hormone, oxytocin, this one's only 9 amino acids in length, and insulin's about 165, if I remember right, so it's quite large. Those are all synthesized from amino acids and are referred to as polypeptides. And then the others we have are called monoamines, epinephrine, dopamine, and thyroxine. Thyroxine is a hormone released by the thyroid gland, but all 3 of those are synthesized from the amino acid tyrosine. And they're referred to as monoamines because they have a single amine group attached to them. But they are referred to as monoamines. You may see epinephrine, dopamine, norepinephrine referred to as catecholamines. We'll get into that more in physiology. Now, based on the structure of these molecules, it will determine where they act on the cell. Any peptide hormones, such as these right here, because they are lipophilic, they are hydrophilic and lipophobic, they will attach to receptors on the cell membrane. Your steroidal molecules are lipophilic or hydrophobic, and as a result they will penetrate through the cell membrane and mediate their effects within the cell. They usually bind to or penetrate into the nucleus and act on DNA or the synthesis of RNA. And then the monoamines, epinephrine and dopamine and norepinephrine, these act on specific cell membrane receptors. Thyroxine is interesting because it is derived from amino acid, but it penetrates through the cell membrane and mediates its effect within the cell itself. And once attached to the cell, they may activate what is called a second messenger response, which increases the production of cyclic AMP through adenylate cyclase. They may act on protein synthesis, any number of things. But again, you'll get more of that in physiology. Okay, let's look at these different structures then. Now the hypothalamus sits right up here in the floor of the brain, is the lowest structure of the diencephalon. Consists of about 10 or 12, I don't remember the exact number, of nuclei within the hypothalamus. 2 of them, referred to as the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei, produce oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. And you can see those nuclei are shown right here. Now, Once those hormones are synthesized, they move down into the posterior pituitary by axoplasmic flow. They move down the neurons into the posterior pituitary, and they're stored there and then released. The other hypothalamic hormones are manufactured up here. The regulatory hormones are manufactured up here in the hypothalamus, and they come down into the anterior pituitary by way of a portal circulation called the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal circulation. You don't need to remember that, but it is a portal circulation. And the pituitary gland sits in the cella turcica of the sphenoid bone. It's attached to the hypothalamus by an infundibular stalk. This is the infundibulum right here. And the anterior pituitary is referred to as the adenohypophysis. The Greek term for pituitary gland is hypophysis. And you remember, cella turcica is also referred to as the hypophyseal fossa. So those are some elements. But at any rate, the adenohypophysis is the anterior pituitary. It releases 7 different hormones. We'll look at those. You don't need to know all the different divisions, but it is broken down based on the cell structure into 3 different divisions. The posterior pituitary is referred to as the neurohypophysis. And it stores those 2 hormones I mentioned before, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Okay, these are the anterior pituitary hormones. And there are 7 of them. Thyroid stimulating hormone, and if you look at the name, that's pretty much going to tell you where they act. Thyroid stimulating hormone, where's that going to act? On the thyroid gland. Growth hormone, where's that going to act? Anybody know? Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Growth hormone acts on every cell in the body. It especially acts on bone and muscle, and that's why these athletes are taking growth hormone.